1940 marked the year when the foundations of one of the most iconic American fighters of World War II were laid, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The United States watched the escalating conflict in Europe with growing urgency as German Luftwaffe fighters, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf FW 190, dominated the skies. The fall of France and the Battle of Britain made it clear that the next global war would be fought heavily in the air. The U.S. Army Air Corps, soon to become the U.S. Army Air Forces, needed a new fighter that could survive the brutal reality of high-altitude combat, escort bombers deep into enemy territory, and deliver devastating firepower. The aircraft that would meet this challenge was the P-47 Thunderbolt, a plane unlike any the world had seen before. The Thunderbolt was born at Republic Aviation under the guidance of designer Alexander Kartveli. His vision for the new fighter was clear. It had to be powerful, tough, and heavily armed. The heart of this aircraft was the Pratt & Amp Whitney R2800 double WASP engine, an 18-cylinder, air-cooled radial powerhouse generating over 2,000 horsepower. This engine, coupled with a sophisticated turbo-supercharger system, gave the P-47 exceptional high-altitude performance, making it ideal for bomber escort missions where American heavy bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator operated. The aircraft's large fuselage, necessary to house the engine and turbo-supercharger ducting, gave it a robust and imposing appearance that would later earn it the nickname the Jug. From the start, the Thunderbolt was designed for survival and lethality. It carried 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 4 in each wing, capable of shredding enemy fighters and ground targets alike. Its armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks dramatically increased pilot survivability. In contrast to the sleek, lightweight fighters of Europe, the P-47 was a flying fortress in its own right, able to take tremendous punishment and return to base with holes in its wings and fuselage that would have downed lesser planes. The XP-47B prototype first flew on May 6, 1941, and immediately impressed test pilots with its speed and stability. Early challenges with weight and landing gear were quickly addressed as Republic Aviation rushed to refine the design. By late 1941, production of the P-47B and subsequent P-47C had begun, just as the United States was thrust into World War II following the attack on Pearl Harbor. With war now a reality, the Thunderbolt became a centerpiece of American fighter strategy. In the skies, the P-47's role was clear. It would serve as a high-altitude escort fighter and a heavy hitter against the Luftwaffe. Its sheer size and durability gave Allied pilots the confidence to dive into combat with German aircraft, knowing that their Thunderbolt could withstand incredible damage and still bring them home. While initially criticized for its large frame and slower climb rate compared to some European fighters, pilots soon discovered its unmatched diving speed, firepower, and survivability. The Thunderbolt became the workhorse of the U.S. Army Air Forces, a fighter capable of both protecting bombers and striking ground targets with devastating effect. By the time America fully entered the war, the P-47 Thunderbolt had emerged as one of the most formidable aircraft of its era. It was not the most elegant fighter in the sky, but it was a symbol of American engineering. Rugged, relentless, and lethal. Its story was just beginning, and soon it would dominate the air war over Europe and prove itself in the Pacific as well. 1941 transitioned into 1942, and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was moving from an ambitious prototype to a frontline weapon of war. The United States, reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor, was now fully mobilizing for global conflict. While production ramped up, American strategists knew that air superiority over Europe would be key to victory. The 8th Air Force, tasked with carrying the war to Germany through daylight bombing, required a powerful escort fighter that could survive high-altitude combat and deliver punishing firepower. The P-47 Thunderbolt was ready to take on that role, but its journey to the front lines would be a story of rapid adaptation, pilot learning, and technological evolution. The early production models, the P-47B and P-47C, began reaching units in early 1942. Training new pilots for this massive fighter was no small task. Compared to earlier American fighters like the P-40 Warhawk or the P-39 Airacobra, the Thunderbolt was enormous. Its fuselage was bulky, its landing gear wide and sturdy, and its radial engine dominated the nose of the aircraft. pilots quickly discovered that the Thunderbolt was not a nimble, lightweight dogfighter. It was a heavyweight prizefighter built to strike hard and take punishment. Its cockpit sat high, providing excellent visibility, but its size and power required a steady hand during takeoff and landing. What truly made the Thunderbolt unique was its turbo-supercharged engine. The R2800 Double Wasp could deliver exceptional speed at altitudes exceeding 25,000 feet, a critical factor for escorting the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator bombers on deep penetration raids into German territory. The turbo-supercharger system, located in the rear fuselage with long ducting to the engine, allowed the P-47 to maintain power where most German fighters struggled. At high altitudes, it could reach speeds over 420 miles per hour, making it a formidable adversary to the Luftwaffe. As the Thunderbolt began flying with the 56th Fighter Group in England in late 1942 and early 1943, pilots learned the tactics that would make the plane famous. Unlike the agile Spitfires or the lightweight Messerschmitt Bf 109s, the P-47 excelled at high-speed diving attacks and slashing passes. Pilots were trained to avoid slow, turning dogfights with the German fighters, which could outmaneuver the big American machine in a flat circle. Instead, Thunderbolt pilots embraced boom and zoom tactics, dive from altitude, unleash a devastating burst from the 8.50 caliber machine guns, then climb away to prepare for another strike. These tactics played directly to the Thunderbolt's strengths: speed, firepower, and durability. The first combat encounters came in early 1943. P-47s of the 4th and 56th Fighter Groups escorted American bombers on missions over occupied France. The results were mixed at first, as pilots adjusted to the aircraft's unique handling and limited range. Early Thunderbolts lacked the ability to escort bombers deep into Germany, which limited their usefulness in the early stages of the air offensive. However, within their operational radius, they proved lethal. Luftwaffe pilots, who initially mocked the bulky American fighter, soon learned to respect it. The 8 machine guns could shred a fighter or bomber in seconds, and the aircraft's toughness meant that many P-47s returned to base full of holes that would have destroyed a lighter plane. One of the defining features of the P-47 was its ability to take damage and keep flying. Reports from Europe began to circulate of Thunderbolts limping home on one-cylinder bank, with entire sections of their tails or wings shot away, and still landing safely. This ruggedness built confidence among pilots, who came to trust that their machine could bring them home even in the harshest conditions. As 1943 progressed, the Thunderbolt's operational impact grew. Allied bombing campaigns intensified, with raids on German industrial centers, submarine pens, and rail hubs. The Luftwaffe responded fiercely, sending Bf 109s and Fw 190s to intercept the bomber formations. P-47 pilots rose to the challenge. In July 1943, during raids over Rouen and Abbeville, the Thunderbolt scored its first confirmed victories, proving that this heavyweight could indeed dominate the skies when used correctly. The psychological effect on both sides was profound. German pilots realized that the Americans now had a fighter that could survive their guns and hit back with devastating force. Allied pilots, many of whom were flying their first combat tours, felt empowered by the Thunderbolt's resilience and heavy armament. While its short range was still a limitation, it excelled at protecting bombers over northern France and the Low Countries, giving the 8th Air Force a critical foothold in the air war over Europe. Behind the front lines, Republic Aviation and the U.S. Army Air Forces worked tirelessly to improve the aircraft. Engineers addressed mechanical issues, fine-tuned the engine, and prepared for longer-range missions. The stage was being set for the Thunderbolt to expand its reach deep into Germany, where the air war would be decided. By the end of 1943, the P-47 had transformed from an untested newcomer into a feared presence in the European skies. Its massive frame, roaring radial engine, and 8 machine guns were now symbols of American air power. And soon, with the addition of external fuel tanks and tactical refinements, it would carry the fight to the heart of the Reich. 1943 flowed into 1944, and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had become a cornerstone of American air power over Europe. By now, the Allied strategy of daylight bombing against the heart of Germany was in full swing. The 8th Air Force's B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators were pounding industrial centers, oil refineries, and transportation hubs, while the Luftwaffe fought desperately to defend the Reich. The Thunderbolt, with its thundering R2800 radial engine and 8 heavy Browning .50 caliber machine guns, had evolved from a short-range escort into a true long-range fighter. This transformation would define its peak wartime performance and cement its reputation as one of the most important fighters of the war. The biggest change came with the introduction of drop tanks and the P-47D variant. Early Thunderbolts could not escort bombers far into Germany, which forced bombers to fly unprotected through the most dangerous parts of their missions. Luftwaffe fighters exploited this by attacking relentlessly over cities like Regensburg, Schweinfurt, and Bremen, inflicting heavy losses. By late 1943 and early 1944, external fuel tanks extended the Thunderbolt's range dramatically. Suddenly, the massive fighter could follow bomber formations deeper into occupied Europe, even reaching as far as Berlin on certain missions. This single change shifted the balance of the air war. The pilots of the 56th Fighter Group, famously known as Zemke's Wolfpack after their leader Hubert Zemke, became the vanguard of P-47 combat. Their tactics were aggressive and innovative. Thunderbolts would position themselves above bomber formations at high altitude, waiting for the inevitable German interceptors to appear. When Bf-109s or Fw-190s dove toward the bombers, the P-47s would respond with a diving attack of their own, using their superior speed in a dive to close quickly. The boom and zoom tactic allowed Thunderbolts to deliver devastating bursts from their 8.50 caliber guns and then climb back to altitude, avoiding drawn-out dogfights that favored the more agile German aircraft. The lethality of the Thunderbolt was on full display during the Big Week in February 1944, a coordinated series of massive bombing raids targeting German aircraft production. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had into the fight, sending waves of Bf-109s and Fw-190s to break up bomber formations. P-47 units, alongside the newly arrived P-51 Mustangs, went to work tearing into the German fighters. Thunderbolt pilots like Francis Gaby Gabreski, Robert S. Johnson, and Walker Bud Mahurin became household names in the air war, each racking up impressive kill counts. Johnson famously returned to base multiple times in a Thunderbolt riddled with holes, including one mission where over 200 bullet impacts were counted on his aircraft, yet it still brought him home. By spring 1944, the Thunderbolt had fully embraced a dual role: bomber escort and ground attack. While it was a fearsome air-to-air fighter at altitude, commanders realized that its size, durability, and firepower made it ideal for ground-pounding missions. Equipped with bombs, rockets, and its standard machine guns, the P-47 became a flying battering ram against the German war machine on the ground. It hunted trains, trucks, and troop concentrations, devastating the logistical network that supported German forces in occupied Europe. Rail yards in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands became primary targets, and the Luftwaffe's already strained supply situation worsened as Thunderbolt squadrons roamed freely. One of the Thunderbolt's most feared capabilities was low-level strafing. Pilots would descend to treetop height, unleashing streams of .50 caliber fire into locomotives, convoys, and flak positions. The rugged airframe and air-cooled radial engine gave the P-47 an unmatched ability to absorb ground fire. Unlike liquid-cooled fighters, which were often lost to a single coolant hit, the Thunderbolt could take bullets in the engine and still keep flying. German troops nicknamed it the Jug, short for Juggernaut. And for them, the distinctive roar of its radial engine and the ripping sound of its guns were terrifying omens. The D-25 variant, introduced in mid-1944, added a bubble canopy, dramatically improving rearward visibility and giving pilots an even greater edge in combat. Coupled with enhanced armament options, including underwing rockets, the P-47 evolved into a true multi-role fighter bomber. By the summer of 1944, during the lead-up to the D-Day invasion, Thunderbolts were a constant presence over occupied Europe. They flew escort for bombers striking deep into Germany, swept ahead of invasion forces to eliminate transport hubs, and conducted relentless armed reconnaissance missions. When Operation Overlord began on June 6, 1944, the P-47 was at the peak of its operational power. Hundreds of Thunderbolts covered the Normandy landings, attacking German artillery, cutting rail lines, and engaging Luftwaffe fighters whenever they dared approach. The combination of high-altitude escort and low-level ground attack made the Thunderbolt a critical tool in the Allied effort to gain total air superiority over France. The Luftwaffe's dwindling numbers and experienced pilot shortage only amplified the Thunderbolt's dominance. By the time the Allies broke out of Normandy in July 1944, the P-47 had become the embodiment of American air power in Europe: tough, reliable, and versatile. It could destroy targets in the air and on the ground, survive intense damage, and return home. The stage was now set for the Thunderbolt to carry its destructive power across Western Europe, paving the way for the liberation of France and the eventual drive into the heart of Germany. 1944 marked the moment when the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt fully embraced its role as one of the most decisive weapons of the Allied advance through Western Europe. The lessons learned from earlier escort and ground attack missions had matured into a doctrine of total air dominance and relentless interdiction. By the summer, the Thunderbolt had transitioned from being just a bomber escort to the quintessential fighter bomber, striking deep into German lines and shaping the battlefield with both its guns and bombs. Its combination of durability, firepower, and versatility ensured that it would remain a critical asset in every major Allied operation leading to the collapse of Nazi Germany. After the success of the D-Day landings in June 1944, the focus shifted to consolidating the Normandy beachhead and breaking out into the French countryside. German forces, though battered, were still capable of stiff resistance. They relied heavily on armored counterattacks and the intricate network of French roads and railways to move reinforcements and supplies. This is where the P-47's strength as a ground attack platform came to the forefront. Thunderbolt squadrons flew constant sorties, seeking out German convoys, fuel depots, and troop concentrations. Equipped with bombs, rockets, and its 8.50 caliber machine guns, the aircraft became the scourge of the German army in daylight. Pilots developed ruthless efficiency in train-busting missions, targeting locomotives, rail cars, and bridges to strangle German logistics. The rugged radial engine and robust airframe allowed the P-47 to perform dangerous low-level attacks that would have been suicidal for more delicate aircraft. Strafing runs at treetop height exposed the Thunderbolt to flak and small arms fire, but its ability to absorb punishment was legendary. Pilots often returned to base with wings riddled with bullet holes, control surfaces shredded, or cylinders damaged. Yet the Jug kept flying. German soldiers learned to fear the howl of a diving Thunderbolt, which often preceded the explosive destruction of trucks, half-tracks, or artillery positions. Its presence over the battlefield broke morale and forced German columns to scatter and seek cover, slowing their movements and buying precious time for advancing Allied ground forces. During the Allied breakout from Normandy in Operation Cobra in late July 1944, the P-47 played a defining role. Before the ground assault, Thunderbolts conducted extensive interdiction missions to isolate the battlefield. They destroyed bridges over the Weir and Sea rivers, targeted German fuel dumps, and bombed retreating columns along the hedgerow-lined roads. When American armor under General Patton's Third Army began its rapid advance, P-47 squadrons provided almost continuous close air support, blasting German strongpoints and pummeling any armored vehicles that attempted counterattacks. It was during this period that the Thunderbolt's reputation as a flying artillery piece became fully deserved. The liberation of Paris in August 1944 further demonstrated the aircraft's importance. As Allied forces surged eastward, Thunderbolts operated from hastily prepared forward airstrips in France, reducing turnaround times and maximizing sortie rates. Their missions evolved into a relentless pattern of fighter sweeps, bomber escorts, and low-level strikes that left German forces with little room to maneuver in daylight. The Luftwaffe, by now a shadow of its former self, could only mount sporadic resistance. When German fighters did rise to challenge the Allied air umbrella, Thunderbolt pilots met them with disciplined boom and zoom attacks, exploiting the aircraft's superior dive speed and firepower. In the fall of 1944, as the Allies pressed toward the German border, the P-47 continued to demonstrate its extraordinary flexibility. Thunderbolts flew deep interdiction missions against the Siegfried Line's logistical network, hunting rail traffic and fuel convoys that were vital for German defensive operations. At the same time, they escorted heavy bombers striking synthetic oil plants, ball-bearing factories, and transportation hubs in the Ruhr. This dual capability, dominating the skies and devastating the ground, made the Thunderbolt indispensable. Pilots often flew 2 or 3 sorties per day, returning to base only long enough to refuel, rearm, and take off again to keep pressure on the enemy. Perhaps the most striking demonstration of the P-47's capabilities came during the Allied push toward the Meuse River in preparation for crossing into Germany. In September 1944, as Operation Market Garden unfolded in the Netherlands, Thunderbolts provided both high-altitude escort for troop carriers and ruthless low-level support against German counterattacks. The sight of P-47s rocketing German armor and strafing infantry columns was a morale boost to Allied troops on the ground and a nightmare for German units struggling to reinforce their positions. Even as weather and mud complicated operations, the Thunderbolt proved its reliability and ruggedness, flying from rough forward fields with minimal maintenance. By the close of 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had solidified its role as the backbone of Allied tactical air power in Western Europe. It had transformed the battlefield by cutting off enemy supply lines, protecting bomber formations, and providing near-instant aerial support to ground offensives. Its sheer presence was enough to force the enemy to disperse, hide, or risk destruction. Every day, the Jug reminded German soldiers and pilots alike that the Allies controlled the skies. Its performance during the breakout from Normandy, the rapid drive across France, and the battles along the German frontier had proven that this fighter was far more than a bomber escort. It was a war-winning weapon. By early 1945, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had become a symbol of relentless Allied air power. The war in Europe was entering its final, ferocious stage. Germany was reeling from the combined pressure of the Eastern and Western fronts, but the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe were far from finished. For the P-47 and its pilots, this was the period of constant operations, deep penetration raids, and the most destructive ground attack missions of the war. Thunderbolt squadrons were flying daily, often multiple sorties per day, striking anything that moved and ensuring the German military could not regroup or retreat in an organized fashion. January and February 1945 saw the continuation of the Battle of the Bulge aftermath, where the P-47 had already proven its worth as a close support and interdiction aircraft. With the German offensive crushed, Allied High Command shifted its focus toward crossing the Rhine and punching into the industrial heartland of the Reich. For Thunderbolt squadrons, this meant 2 primary tasks: obliterate German transport and supply networks, and provide close air support to advancing Allied armor. Bridges, railways, fuel depots, marshalling yards, and convoys were all prime targets. The P-47's rugged airframe and heavy armament made it uniquely suited for these punishing, low-altitude missions. The P-47's 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns could deliver a storm of lead against any target on the ground. Trains became one of its most frequent victims. Pilots quickly learned to aim for the locomotive, as destroying a single engine could paralyze an entire rail line. Strafing runs often left smoking wrecks of locomotives and shattered boxcars strewn across the countryside. German rail workers and anti-aircraft gunners tried to defend these vital lifelines, but the speed and aggression of P-47 attacks often overwhelmed them. Crews also used skip bombing techniques, where 500 or 1,000 pound bombs were released low and bounced into bridges, tunnels, or stationary trains before detonating. As the Allies advanced into Western Germany, P-47 squadrons adopted a hunter-killer approach to air operations. Small flights roamed over highways and secondary roads, seeking any sign of movement. German troops, increasingly short of fuel and transport, often relied on horse-drawn wagons or bicycles to move supplies. Nothing was safe. Pilots described the surreal scenes of attacking entire columns of wagons, scattering horses and men in every direction. While brutal, these attacks directly contributed to the collapse of German mobility. Without the ability to reinforce or retreat, many frontline units were surrounded and destroyed. In March 1945, the Rhine crossings became the central focus of Allied operations. Operation Plunder and the airborne assault of Operation Varsity required complete air supremacy. The P-47 played a vital role in suppressing German flak positions and defending the skies from the few remaining Luftwaffe aircraft. By this stage, German fighter opposition was sporadic but still deadly. Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighters occasionally appeared, making high-speed passes at bomber formations. While the P-47 was slower, its ability to dive at incredible speeds allowed skilled pilots to sometimes intercept jets during landing or takeoff. More commonly, Thunderbolt pilots destroyed Mi-262s on the ground, strafing their exposed airfields during relentless flak suppression and airfield denial operations. The danger of low-level operations in 1945 cannot be overstated. While the Luftwaffe was crippled, German anti-aircraft defenses were concentrated and deadly. Light flak guns like the 20mm and 37mm cannons lined roads, rivers, and towns. Even small villages could erupt in sheets of tracer fire when a P-47 squadron approached. Pilots described the terrifying experience of flying through flak traps, where overlapping gun positions created deadly zones of exploding shells and shrapnel. Yet the Thunderbolt's durability saved countless lives. Stories circulated of P-47s returning to base with gaping holes in their wings, missing cylinders, or shredded control surfaces. Aircraft that would have been lost if they were lighter or liquid-cooled. By April 1945, the Thunderbolt's missions extended deep into central Germany. Squadrons patrolled the skies over shattered cities like Kassel, Magdeburg, and Leipzig. Pilots hunted trains and convoys attempting last-ditch withdrawals to Bavaria and Czechoslovakia. Urban areas offered opportunities for precision strikes on military depots, but also immense risk from concentrated flak. Bombing and strafing missions were often followed by reconnaissance sweeps, allowing the P-47 to serve as the eyes and fists of the advancing Allied forces. One of the unique aspects of P-47 operations in these months was the variety of ordnance carried. A single Thunderbolt could be configured with bombs, rockets, and its standard 8 heavy machine guns, turning it into a flying weapons platform. Pilots frequently launched 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, VARs, at tanks, bunkers, or river barges. Rockets gave the P-47 a standoff strike capability, while its guns provided the close finishing blow. Some pilots became experts in combined attacks, rolling in steeply, firing rockets to suppress a target, then strafing the survivors with machine gun fire. This versatility was one of the reasons the Thunderbolt earned the nickname the Juggernaut, or simply the Jug. Meanwhile, the psychological effect of P-47 operations on German troops was immense. Survivors of strafing runs described the deafening roar of the Thunderbolt's engine, the tearing sound of its guns, and the hopelessness of being caught in the open under such overwhelming firepower. Allied tank crews and infantry frequently expressed gratitude for the J-bows that shattered German counterattacks before they could reach the front. Many Allied advances in early 1945 were only possible because the P-47 had reduced enemy mobility and morale to the breaking point. As May approached and the Third Reich crumbled, Thunderbolt squadrons continued to strike with relentless energy. Even in the final days, when German forces were surrendering en masse, P-47s were called upon to interdict the last organized retreats. By the time Germany capitulated, the P-47 had flown hundreds of thousands of sorties, destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft in the air and on the ground, and obliterated untold numbers of trains, vehicles, and supply dumps. It had transformed from a high-altitude escort fighter into one of the most feared ground attack aircraft of the war. Part 5 of the P-47's story is a testament to how a single aircraft could dominate multiple roles at once: escort, fighter, bomber, and executioner of enemy logistics. In the hands of disciplined American pilots, it was the unstoppable hammer of Allied air power, turning the skies into a weapon and the ground below into a graveyard for the Axis war machine. Spring 1945 signaled the climactic phase of World War II in Europe, with the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt positioned at the forefront of the Allies' relentless advance into the German heartland. The conflict had reached a critical juncture. Germany was on the defensive, yet the ferocity of its resistance had not diminished. The Thunderbolt, having evolved through years of sustained combat, was now operating as a multifaceted instrument of destruction and control, executing roles that spanned from high-altitude bomber escort missions to perilous low-level ground attacks deep behind enemy lines. This final chapter demonstrated the aircraft's full combat potential and underscored its contribution to the Allied victory. By the start of 1945, Allied forces had pushed to the Rhine River, Germany's last significant natural defensive barrier. The Thunderbolt squadrons were integral to the extensive preparatory operations aimed at isolating the battlefield and crippling German attempts to reinforce and resupply their frontline units. Thunderbolt pilots undertook armed reconnaissance missions, flying dangerously low over enemy territory to detect and eliminate trucks, troop transports, artillery emplacements, and even smaller conveyances like horse-drawn wagons and bicycles. These relentless strikes, coined JBOs from Jag Bomber, became infamous among German soldiers for their suddenness, accuracy, and lethality. The psychological impact was profound. Fear of air attack forced German units to adopt nighttime movement and camouflage, severely restricting their operational flexibility. One of the most remarkable aspects of the P-47 during these final months was its extraordinary resilience. The aircraft's rugged airframe and powerful, air-cooled Pratt & Amp Whitney R2800 double WASP engine gave it a unique ability to sustain heavy damage and still return pilots safely to base. Numerous after-action reports detail Thunderbolts limping home with wings perforated by flak bursts, engine cylinders shot out yet still running, tail assemblies shredded by anti-aircraft fire, and control surfaces riddled with bullet holes. This toughness not only saved countless pilot lives but also maintained the pace of aerial operations, as rapid ground repairs could return damaged aircraft to flight within hours, ensuring sustained pressure on retreating German forces. In March 1945, the Thunderbolt played a pivotal role in Operation Plunder, the massive Allied effort to cross the Rhine River and penetrate deeper into Germany. Thunderbolt units delivered intense bombing and strafing runs against German defensive positions, artillery batteries, and troop concentrations positioned along the riverbanks. These attacks suppressed enemy firepower and disrupted command and control networks, facilitating the establishment of bridgeheads. Once the Allies secured crossings, the Thunderbolts shifted to close air support roles, flying low and fast to engage counterattacking armor and infantry. Their firepower, combined with excellent visibility from the cockpit and robust construction, made them ideal for the fluid and chaotic battlefield conditions. Allied armored spearheads often counted on the presence of Thunderbolt support to neutralize threats too dangerous for ground units alone. The Luftwaffe, although still present, was drastically weakened by this stage. German fighter opposition was sporadic and desperate, often relying on hastily trained pilots flying jet aircraft like the Messerschmitt Me 262 or piston-engine fighters such as the Focke-Wulf FW-190. Although jets could outpace the Thunderbolt in straight-line speed, their vulnerability during takeoff and landing, coupled with the Allies' airfield bombings and fighter patrols, limited their operational impact. Thunderbolt pilots developed tactics to evade jet attacks, such as tight turns and diving maneuvers, exploiting the aircraft's excellent high-speed handling and diving capabilities. Despite the technological leap represented by jets, the P-47's firepower and durability made it a formidable adversary, capable of turning the tide in many aerial skirmishes. Beyond air-to-air combat, the Thunderbolt excelled in the destruction of German transport infrastructure, a vital element of the Allied strategy to paralyze enemy logistics. The aircraft specialized in rail cuts, bombing and strafing railway tracks, marshalling yards and bridges. Trains, especially locomotives hauling troops or supplies, were high-value targets. Destroying one locomotive could render entire rail lines useless for days or weeks. Thunderbolts also targeted road convoys, fuel depots, and communications hubs. These interdiction efforts significantly hampered the German army's ability to maneuver and resupply, contributing directly to the rapid Allied advances. The combination of heavy machine guns, bombs, and rockets gave the P-47 unprecedented flexibility and destructive power against a broad spectrum of ground targets. April 1945 saw the Thunderbolt operating deeper into the devastated German heartland. Pilots frequently reported vast stretches of shattered German columns, including overturned tanks, destroyed trucks, burned-out artillery positions, and razed supply dumps. While frontline targets decreased as German forces retreated or surrendered, the danger from remaining ground fire, light flak, machine guns, and isolated infantry remained constant. Low-level missions, essential for close air support and interdiction, exposed Thunderbolt crews to these threats daily. The aircraft's ruggedness, however, continued to save lives and maintain mission effectiveness, with many pilots returning from missions despite severe battle damage. The Thunderbolt's armament was a cornerstone of its battlefield success. Equipped with 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns mounted in the wings, it possessed one of the most lethal fighter armaments of the war. These guns could decimate soft-skinned vehicles, aircraft on the ground, and exposed infantry positions. When combined with external ordnance, bombs, unguided rockets, and sometimes napalm, the P-47 became a true flying artillery platform. Pilots developed refined attack profiles, from shallow strafing passes to steep dive bombing runs, optimizing the balance between accuracy, firepower, and survivability. This versatility allowed Thunderbolt squadrons to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions and mission requirements. As the Allies and Soviet forces converged on Berlin, Thunderbolts continued to escort bomber formations, hunting down the dwindling Luftwaffe fighters and providing close support to advancing ground troops. They played a significant role in neutralizing the German war machine in its final days, helping to dismantle remaining resistance pockets and supporting liberation efforts across occupied Europe. By victory in Europe Day, May 8, 1945, the P-47 had flown an estimated 746,000 combat sorties, a staggering figure that underscores its vital contribution to the Allied war effort. Statistically, the P-47 was one of the most effective Allied fighters, credited with thousands of aerial victories and countless ground kills. However, its legacy transcends numbers. For the pilots who flew it, the Thunderbolt was a dependable guardian that combined power, protection, and precision. It allowed them to engage the enemy aggressively, knowing their aircraft could withstand damage that would ground or destroy lesser fighters. Its distinctive radial engine's thunderous roar and the overwhelming firepower instilled terror in enemy ranks, symbolizing the relentless might of Allied air power. In the post-war era, the P-47 Thunderbolt's influence persisted. Its design principles, emphasizing ruggedness, heavy armament, and multi-role capability, shaped the development of future fighter aircraft. The stories of valor, innovation, and endurance associated with the Thunderbolt continue to inspire aviation enthusiasts and historians alike, ensuring that this iconic aircraft remains a symbol of Allied determination, technological achievement, and ultimate victory in World War II.